The words still echoed in my mind 15 years later, delivered with that particular brand of family cruelty that cuts deeper than any stranger's insult ever could. My cousin Derek had been 28 then, fresh out of his MBA program and newly hired at his father's investment firm, practically vibrating with self-importance as he surveyed my tiny apartment. "Emma, you need to be realistic about your limitations," he'd said, picking up my business plan from the coffee table like it was contaminated. "A catering business? With what capital? What experience? You're a community college dropout working at a diner. Some people are meant to build empires, and others are meant to serve the people who do." I'd been 23, living paycheck to paycheck, and foolish enough to think family might offer encouragement instead of condescension. The business plan he'd dismissed so casually represented months of research, cost projections, and dreams I'd been nurturing since high school. I'd invited him over hoping for advice, maybe even a small loan to get started. Instead, I got a lecture about knowing my place. "Derek," I'd said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice, "I've been cooking since I was 12. I've worked in restaurants for 5 years. I know food, I know service, and I know there's a market for high-quality catering in this city." He'd laughed, actually laughed, while adjusting his expensive tie. "Emma, wanting something and being capable of achieving it are completely different things. You don't have the education, the connections, or the financial backing to compete in the catering industry. The smart thing would be to find a stable job with benefits and stop chasing fantasies. So you think I'll never succeed? I think you'll save yourself a lot of disappointment if you accept reality now, instead of learning it the hard way later." Derek had left that evening, probably forgetting our conversation before he reached his BMW. But I'd spent the next 3 hours staring at my business plan, wondering if he was right, if I really was deluding myself about my potential. Then I'd gotten angry. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns out quickly, but the cold, determined fury that sustains itself over years and transforms into something far more powerful: motivation. I started small, impossibly small, with a $200 loan from my diner manager and a business license that cost more than my monthly food budget. Weekend catering for birthday parties and small office events, cooking out of my apartment kitchen and delivering food in my 15-year-old Honda. The first year was brutal. 18-hour days, constant rejection, clients who changed their minds at the last minute or complained about prices that barely covered my costs. I learned about food safety regulations the hard way, got my first commercial kitchen license, and discovered that talent meant nothing without business skills. I had to teach myself through library books and online tutorials. But I also learned that Derek had been wrong about one crucial thing. I did have advantages he'd never considered. I understood what working-class families wanted from caterers, because I came from a working-class family. I knew how to stretch budgets and maximize flavor because I'd been doing both my entire life. Most importantly, I was willing to work harder than people who'd never had to fight for anything. By year 3, I'd hired my first employee and moved into a small commercial kitchen. By year 5, I had a staff of 12 and contracts with 3 major corporate clients. By year 8, I owned the building that housed my commercial kitchen and had a waiting list for wedding catering that stretched 6 months. Derek, meanwhile, had been fired from his father's investment firm for what family whispers described as, quote, performance issues and attitude problems. He'd bounced between several financial services companies, never quite living up to the promise his MBA was supposed to guarantee. I might have felt sorry for him if I hadn't still remembered the dismissive certainty in his voice when he'd told me I'd never amount to anything. Year 10 brought the opportunity I'd been unconsciously preparing for since that night in my apartment. I was expanding again, opening a second location with an upscale event space, and I needed an operations manager with financial experience. Someone who understood budgets, client relations, and the kind of strategic planning that would take my business to the next level. Derek's resume arrived through a headhunter, and I stared at it for a full 5 minutes before I started laughing. He was perfect for the position. Overqualified, actually, with exactly the kind of corporate experience my growing business needed. He was also desperate, having been unemployed for 8 months after his last position didn't work out, according to industry contacts. The interview was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in my new executive office, a space that overlooked the bustling kitchen, where 43 employees prepared food for events across the city. I'd come a long way from cooking in my apartment, and I wanted Derek to see exactly how far. He arrived 5 minutes early, wearing a suit that had seen better days and carrying himself with the forced confidence of someone trying to hide desperation. When my assistant showed him into the office, his face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then something that might have been embarrassment. "Emma?" he said, looking around the office like he'd walked into the wrong building. "What are you doing here?" "I own this," I said simply, gesturing toward the kitchen visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Emerald Catering. You applied for our operations manager position." Derek's composure cracked for just a moment, and I saw the man who'd once dismissed my dreams, struggling to process the reality of my success. "You own Emerald Catering?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I mean, I knew the company name, but I didn't realize, I didn't connect, that the community college dropout had built the most successful catering company in the tri-state area?" I finished. "It's understandable. According to you, I lacked the education, connections, and financial backing to compete in this industry." Derek had the grace to look ashamed, though I suspected it was more about needing the job than genuine remorse. "Emma, I may have been overly cautious in my assessment of your business plan. Obviously, you've proven very successful." Overly cautious was an interesting way to describe contemptuous dismissal, but I let it pass. "Tell me about your experience with operations management." The interview continued for 45 minutes, and I had to admit that Derek was qualified for the position. His MBA education had given him exactly the kind of systematic thinking my expanding business needed. His corporate experience, even with its rocky patches, had taught him about scaling operations and managing complex client relationships. He was also hungry in a way that reminded me of my younger self, not the confident hunger of someone expecting success, but the desperate hunger of someone who'd learned that success wasn't guaranteed, regardless of credentials or family connections. "Derek," I said as the interview concluded, "I'm going to offer you the position." Relief flooded his face so obviously that I almost felt guilty about what I was planning. "The salary is $65,000 annually, plus benefits and performance bonuses. You'd start Monday morning at 8 a.m. "Emma, thank you. I mean it. I know our family history makes this complicated, but I promise you won't regret this decision." I smiled, thinking about how true that statement was, though not in the way Derek imagined. "Oh, Derek, one more thing. You're fired." The words hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Derek blinked, certain he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're fired. The job offer was real, the salary was real, and now the termination is real. Effective immediately." Derek stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. "Emma, I don't understand. Why would you offer me a job just to fire me?" "Because 15 years ago you told me I'd never succeed. You dismissed my dreams, mocked my ambitions, and made it clear that you thought I was destined to spend my life serving people like you." I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked my thriving business. "I wanted you to see what you missed. I wanted you to understand that the person you thought would never amount to anything built this empire while you were failing at jobs that were handed to you. Emma, I was young, I was arrogant. I made a mistake in how I evaluated your potential." "Yes, you did. And now you get to live with the consequences of that mistake." Derek rose from his chair, his face cycling through anger, desperation, and something that might have been respect. "So this whole thing was just an elaborate revenge scheme?" "This whole thing was justice. You decided I wasn't worth believing in, so now you don't get to benefit from my success." The confrontation I'd imagined for 15 years was finally happening, and it was exactly as satisfying as I'd hoped it would be. Derek left my office that afternoon with his dignity in tatters and his job prospects exactly where they'd been when he arrived. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt oddly empty. The story might have ended there, with Derek's humiliation and my vindication, but life is rarely that neat. 3 weeks later, I was reviewing applications for the operations manager position again. None of the other candidates had Derek's combination of experience and desperation, when my assistant announced that Derek was here to see me. "I didn't schedule an appointment with him," I said. "He says it's personal, not professional. He'll wait as long as necessary." Against my better judgment, I agreed to see him. Derek looked worse than he had during the interview. Rumpled clothes, exhausted eyes, the appearance of someone who'd been living on stress and too little sleep. "Emma, I need to tell you something that I should have said 15 years ago." I gestured for him to sit, curious despite myself. "You were right to fire me. Not just because of what I said back then, but because of who I was when I said it. I was someone who thought success was inherited rather than earned, that credentials mattered more than character, that people like you were supposed to serve people like me." Derek paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "But here's what I've learned during the 3 weeks since you fired me. You weren't just proving me wrong about your potential. You were teaching me something about my own limitations." "What kind of limitations?" "I spent 15 years believing that my MBA and family connections entitled me to success. When that success didn't materialize, I blamed bad luck, difficult bosses, unfair market conditions. It never occurred to me that I might be the problem." Derek looked around my office, taking in the evidence of everything I'd built. "You succeeded because you were willing to start small, work constantly, and learn from every mistake. I failed because I expected to start big, work normal hours, and never make mistakes worth learning from." "Derek, what do you want?" "I want to apologize, not for the job I won't get, but for the person I was when I dismissed your dreams. And I want to ask you for something that has nothing to do with employment." "Which is?" "Teach me how you did this. Not the business specifics, but the mindset. How do you build something from nothing? How do you sustain motivation when everyone doubts you? How do you learn skills you were never taught?" The request caught me off guard. I'd expected pleading for the job, maybe anger about the humiliation, but not a genuine request for mentorship. "Derek, why should I help you? Why should I invest time in someone who spent years believing I was beneath his notice? Because you're better than I am. Because you've built something meaningful while I've been learning hard lessons about character and humility. Because maybe helping someone who once dismissed you is the ultimate proof that you've transcended everything that made him feel superior." It was a compelling argument, and it forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. My revenge against Derek had been satisfying, but it hadn't actually moved my life forward. It had been about the past rather than the future, about proving a point rather than building something new. "Derek, if I were to consider mentoring you, and I'm not saying I will, what would that look like? What are you hoping to learn? How to start over? How to build something with my hands and brain instead of expecting opportunities to be handed to me? How to fail productively instead of just failing?" Over the following months, Derek became a strange fixture in my life. Not an employee, not exactly a friend, but something like a student studying the fundamentals of earned success. He worked for free in my commercial kitchen, learning food service from the ground up. He attended my business planning meetings as an observer, taking notes on decision-making processes and strategic thinking. Most importantly, he started his own business, a small financial planning service focused on helping working-class families navigate investments and retirement planning. It was exactly the kind of unglamorous, necessary work that the old Derek would have considered beneath him. "Emma," he said during one of our monthly check-ins, "I wanted to update you on my progress and ask for advice about a problem I'm having." "What kind of problem?" "Client retention. I can get people to sign up for financial planning services, but I'm having trouble keeping them engaged long-term. They start strong, then stop returning calls or miss appointments." I thought about the question while reviewing his client data. "Derek, what do you think the problem might be?" "I'm not sure. I provide good advice, my fees are reasonable, and I'm always professional." "But do you understand your clients? Do you know what it feels like to choose between saving for retirement and paying for your kids' school clothes? Do you understand the psychological barriers that keep working-class families from investing?" Derek was quiet for several minutes. "No, I don't think I do." "Then that's your real work. Not just learning financial planning techniques, but understanding the lives and fears of the people you're trying to help." Derek's business grew slowly but steadily over the next 2 years. More importantly, Derek himself grew into someone I barely recognized from our family gatherings. He was humbler, more curious, more willing to admit ignorance and ask for help. The transformation was so complete that I found myself wondering if my original plan had been too simple. "Derek," I said during what had become our regular quarterly dinner meetings, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you resent what I did? The job offer and immediate firing? Derek considered the question while finishing his meal. Emma, if you'd just hired me normally, I would have brought all my old assumptions and entitlements into your company. I would have expected rapid promotion, special treatment because we're family, and recognition for credentials rather than results. And now? Now I understand that success has to be built step by step, that competence has to be demonstrated rather than assumed, and that the most valuable lessons come from people you initially underestimate. Derek paused, meeting my eyes directly. You didn't just fire me from a job, Emma. You fired me from a way of thinking that was preventing me from becoming someone worth believing in. 5 years after that first confrontation in my office, Derek's financial planning business had grown into a small but respected firm, specializing in services for working families. He'd hired 3 employees, all of them people who'd been overlooked by traditional financial services companies. Emma, he told me during our most recent dinner, I got a call last week from someone you might find interesting. Who? Marcus Webb, the headhunter who originally sent you my resume. He wanted to know if I'd be interested in a senior position at a major investment firm. The salary would be triple what I'm making now. Are you considering it? Derek smiled, and I saw echoes of the confidence he'd once worn like armor, but tempered now by experience and humility. I told him I already have the job I want. I'm building something meaningful with people who were dismissed by the same kind of firms that are now trying to recruit me. Any regrets about the path that led you here? Only that it took me so long to understand what you knew instinctively, that real success comes from serving others rather than expecting others to serve you. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the unexpected journey Derek and I had taken together. I'd set out to humiliate someone who'd dismissed my dreams, but I'd ended up helping him discover capabilities he'd never known he possessed. The revenge had been satisfying for about 10 minutes. The mentorship had been meaningful for years. Derek had been wrong when he told me I'd never succeed, but I'd been wrong too. I'd assumed that proving him wrong would be the end of the story, when it was actually just the beginning of a more complex narrative about family, forgiveness, and the different ways people learn to recognize their own worth. Standing in my office the next morning, looking out over the commercial kitchen where Derek had once scrubbed pots to learn the basics of food service, I understood that the most profound revenge wasn't destruction. It was transformation. I'd hired Derek just to fire him, but in the process, I'd fired the person he'd been and helped him become someone worth hiring again. The cousin who'd told me I'd never succeed had been right about one thing. Some people are meant to build empires. He'd just been wrong about which of us was which. But perhaps the most important lesson was that empires built on revenge are monuments to the past, while empires built on service and growth become foundations for the future. Derek had dismissed my potential once, but he'd learned to recognize it eventually. And in teaching him to see my worth, I'd learned to see his, not the worth he'd claimed through credentials and connections, but the worth he'd earned through humility, effort, and genuine service to others. That was a success neither of us could have achieved alone, and it was infinitely more valuable than any revenge I could have devised. The cousin who'd told me I'd never succeed had been transformed into someone who helped others succeed. And that transformation had taught me that the greatest victory wasn't proving doubters wrong, it was helping them become the kind of people who would never doubt others' potential in the first place. In the end, I'd fired Derek just to hire him back as a completely different person. And that was the most successful business decision I'd ever made. 10 years after Derek's transformation, the annual Hartwell family reunion was held at my uncle's country estate, the same place where family hierarchies had been reinforced for decades. I arrived late, having spent the morning resolving a catering crisis that threatened to derail a wedding for 300 guests. Success, I'd learned, meant being perpetually on call for other people's most important moments. Derek was already there, standing in a circle with our cousins Marcus and Jennifer, holding a beer and laughing at something Marcus had said. The sight still surprised me. Derek had once been the family golden boy, the one everyone expected to achieve great things, while Marcus and Jennifer had been the reliable middle managers, competent but unremarkable. Now Derek looked comfortable in their company in a way he never had before, when his MBA and prestigious job had set him apart from the family's more modest achievers. Emma. My Aunt Carol waved me over to where she was sitting with several family matriarchs. the women who controlled family gossip and social positioning with the efficiency of a corporate board. "We were just talking about your business. 5 locations now, is that right?" 6, actually. We opened the Boston location last month. The women nodded approvingly, but I could see the subtle calculations behind their smiles. Success was good for the family's reputation, but too much success could be threatening to the established order. "And Derek's been helping you with some of the financial planning?" asked my cousin Patricia, Derek's older sister, with the tone of someone who'd heard rumors but wanted confirmation. "Derek has his own business now. We consult occasionally, but he's built something impressive independently." Patricia's expression shifted slightly. Derek's transformation had been difficult for his immediate family to process. They'd spent years making excuses for his career struggles, and his current success felt like an implicit criticism of their lowered expectations. "It's wonderful that Derek found his niche," Patricia said carefully, "though I have to say, it's quite different from what we all expected for him." The comment was coded but clear. Derek had fallen from his expected position as the family's business leader, and his current success was being treated as a consolation prize rather than an achievement. I was about to respond when Derek himself appeared at my elbow, holding 2 glasses of wine. "Emma, I wanted to introduce you to someone." He gestured toward a woman I didn't recognize, probably in her 40s, wearing the kind of understated expensive clothes that suggested serious wealth. "This is Janet Morrison, CEO of Morrison Hospitality Group." I knew the name. Morrison was one of the largest hospitality corporations in the country, with hotels and event venues that catered to exactly the kind of high-end clients my business served. "Ms. Morrison," I said, shaking her hand and immediately noticing her firm grip and direct eye contact, "I'm familiar with your company's reputation." "And I'm very familiar with yours. Derek has been telling me about Emerald Catering's growth trajectory, and I'm interested in discussing a potential partnership." The conversation that followed was the kind of opportunity I'd been hoping for but hadn't expected to find at a family barbecue. Morrison Hospitality was looking for exclusive catering partners for their East Coast properties, and Emerald Catering's reputation for quality and reliability had caught their attention. "The partnership would require significant expansion on your part," Janet explained. "We're talking about serving corporate retreats, high-end weddings, and executive events that could double your current revenue within 18 months. "What kind of expansion?" "Additional kitchens, specialized staff, probably a dedicated team just for Morrison properties. It's a substantial investment, but the guaranteed contracts would justify the cost." Derek listened to our conversation with the kind of focused attention he'd once reserved for his own career prospects. But instead of trying to insert himself into negotiations that didn't concern him, he asked thoughtful questions about logistics and financial planning that helped me understand the proposal's implications. "Emma," he said during a brief break in our discussion, "this is exactly the kind of opportunity you've been positioning yourself for. But it's also the kind of decision that could transform your entire business model." "In what way?" "Right now, you control every aspect of Emerald Catering's operations. You know every client, every event, every staff member. If you partner with Morrison, you'll be managing scale rather than details. It's a completely different skill set." Janet nodded approvingly. "Derek raises a good point. Partnership with Morrison means moving from boutique catering to industrial-scale food service. Some companies thrive with that transition. Others lose what made them special in the first place." The conversation continued throughout the afternoon, but I found myself distracted by the family dynamics swirling around us. Derek's introduction of Janet to me had elevated his status in the eyes of relatives who'd been treating his transformation as a step down from his original promise. Marcus, in particular, seemed confused by Derek's apparent influence with someone of Janet's stature. "Derek," he said during dinner, "how do you know Janet Morrison? I mean, she's pretty high level for someone who works with individual families." Derek smiled, and I caught a glimpse of his old confidence, but tempered now by experience. "My business has grown beyond individual financial planning, Marcus. About 40% of my clients now are small business owners who need help with expansion financing and strategic planning. Janet's company has been considering investments in hospitality-adjacent businesses. So you're like a business consultant now? I'm a financial advisor who understands the difference between helping someone balance their checkbook and helping them build something worth inheriting. The distinction was subtle but important, and I could see Marcus processing the implications. Derek hadn't just recovered from his early career failures. He'd evolved into something more sophisticated than anyone in the family had expected. Patricia looked less pleased by her brother's success than confused by it. Derek, I have to ask, are you happy with how things turned out? I mean, this is very different from the path you started on. Derek considered the question while finishing his meal. Patricia, 15 years ago, I thought success meant impressing people who already had everything I wanted. Now I think success means helping people achieve things they thought were impossible. But don't you miss the prestige? The status that comes with working for major investment firms? I miss the salary sometimes, Derek admitted with a laugh. But I don't miss feeling like a fraud who was always one mistake away from being exposed as incompetent. The conversation grew quieter as family members processed Derek's admission. He just acknowledged that his early career success had been built on insecurity rather than confidence, and that his current success felt more authentic despite being less prestigious. Jennifer, who'd always been the family's most perceptive observer, asked the question everyone was thinking. Derek, what changed? What made you willing to start over, instead of just finding another corporate position? Derek glanced at me, and I saw him weighing how much of our history to share with the family. I learned that the person I'd been wasn't someone worth being. Emma helped me understand that credentials and connections don't matter if you're not actually capable of creating value for other people. Emma helped you? Patricia's tone suggested this was news to her. Emma fired me from a job I desperately needed, then spent 2 years teaching me how to earn opportunities instead of expecting them to be handed to me. The family's attention shifted to me, and I could see the recalculation happening in real time. Derek's transformation hadn't been independent. It had been guided by the cousin they'd all underestimated. Emma, my Uncle Richard said, I have to admit, I never understood what you saw in Derek when he was struggling. Most of us thought he was just going through a rough patch that would resolve itself. I didn't see potential in Derek initially, I replied honestly. I saw someone who needed to learn lessons about humility and effort that I'd been forced to learn the hard way. And now? Now I see someone who's built something meaningful by serving people who were overlooked by the same institutions that once employed him. The conversation continued late into the evening, but the family dynamic had shifted in ways that would have seemed impossible at previous reunions. Derek was no longer the disappointing golden boy, and I was no longer the overachieving outsider. We'd become something more complex, a partnership that had transformed both of us in ways that neither could have achieved independently. 3 months later, I was sitting in Morrison Hospitality's corporate boardroom, finalizing the partnership agreement that would transform Emerald Catering from a regional success story into a national operation. Derek sat beside me, not as an employee but as my financial advisor, reviewing contract terms and investment requirements with the expertise he'd developed through years of helping small businesses navigate complex growth decisions. The initial investment will be substantial, Janet Morrison was explaining, but the projected returns justify the risk. We're looking at a 5-year agreement with options for renewal and expansion. Derek leaned over to whisper in my ear. Emma, the numbers work, but you need to understand what you're signing up for. This partnership will require you to delegate operations you've always controlled personally. Meaning you'll become a CEO instead of a head chef. You'll manage managers instead of managing events. It's the difference between running a boutique operation and running a corporation. The decision was more difficult than I'd anticipated. The partnership offered financial rewards beyond anything I'd imagined when I started cooking in my apartment kitchen, but it also meant fundamentally changing the nature of work that had defined my identity for 15 years. Janet, I said, I need to ask you something directly. Why Emerald Catering? You could partner with larger, more established companies that already have the infrastructure for this kind of expansion. Janet smiled. Because larger companies think in quarters and profit margins. You think in terms of client satisfaction and long-term relationships. We want to scale that approach, not replace it with corporate efficiency. And if the scaling changes, what makes us special? Then we'll have learned something valuable about the limits of growth. But Emma, staying small doesn't guarantee staying special. Sometimes you have to risk what you've built to discover what you're capable of building. Derek nodded slowly. Emma, remember what you told me about learning to fail productively? This is that principle applied to success. You're risking current achievements to create future possibilities. I signed the partnership agreement that afternoon, but with modifications Derek had suggested that preserved Emerald Catering's independence while accessing Morrison's resources. It was the kind of strategic thinking that Derek's transformation had made possible, financial sophistication combined with understanding of what made the business worth growing. 6 months into the Morrison partnership, Emerald Catering was serving events in 12 cities across 3 states. My staff had grown from 43 employees to over 200, and I was spending more time in conference rooms than kitchens. The transformation was exactly what Derek had predicted: successful but disorienting. Emma, my new operations manager, reported during our weekly meeting. We've had 3 client complaints this month about food quality consistency across locations. The Boston kitchen is struggling to match the standards set by our original location. Derek, who attended these meetings as our financial consultant, asked the obvious question: what's causing the inconsistency? Training, mostly. The original staff understands our quality standards intuitively, but the new hires are following procedures without understanding the principles behind them. I felt a familiar frustration. This was exactly the kind of problem I could have solved easily when Emerald Catering was small enough for me to personally train every employee. Now I was managing a system that was too large for personal oversight. Derek, I said after the meeting, I think I'm beginning to understand something about the difference between building a business and managing a corporation. Which is, building a business means creating something that reflects your values and capabilities. Managing a corporation means creating systems that can maintain those values and capabilities without your direct involvement. Derek nodded. And which do you prefer? I prefer building. But I'm learning that sometimes you have to master management in order to keep building at a larger scale. The Morrison partnership ultimately proved successful, but it taught me that success itself was more complex than I'd realized. Each level of achievement brought new challenges that required different skills and different ways of thinking about the work. Derek's own business had grown in parallel with mine, evolving from individual financial planning into a consulting firm that specialized in helping family-owned businesses navigate expansion decisions. His client base included 3 companies that had faced similar choices about scaling operations while preserving founding values. Emma, he told me during one of our quarterly dinners, I've been thinking about something you said years ago, about revenge versus transformation. What about it? I think the same principle applies to success. You can use success to prove you're better than people who doubted you, or you can use success to become someone worth believing in. And which approach have we chosen? Derek smiled. I think we've chosen transformation, but it's an ongoing process. Every time we face a new challenge, we have to choose again, whether we're building something meaningful or just protecting something we've already built. Looking back on the 15 years since Derek told me I'd never succeed, I realized that the most valuable outcome hadn't been proving him wrong. It had been discovering that success was less about individual achievement and more about creating opportunities for others to discover their own capabilities. Derek had been transformed from someone who dismissed others' potential into someone who helped them realize it. I'd been transformed from someone who built things for personal validation into someone who built things that could outlast personal involvement. The cousin who'd told me I'd never succeed had been wrong about my potential, but he'd been right about something else. Some people are meant to serve others. He'd just misunderstood what service meant. True service wasn't about accepting limitations. It was about using whatever you'd achieved to help others transcend theirs. I'd hired Derek just to fire him, but the real victory was that we'd both been fired from who we used to be and hired into who we were capable of becoming. And that transformation was ongoing, measured not in quarterly profits or annual growth, but in the number of people who'd been given opportunities to surprise themselves with their own capabilities. The cousin who'd told me I'd never succeed had become someone who helped others succeed. And together, we'd learned that the most sustainable revenge was building something so meaningful that the original insult became irrelevant. In the end, success wasn't about proving doubters wrong. It was about creating a world where doubt itself became unnecessary, because everyone was too busy building something beautiful to waste time tearing others down. 18 months after the Morrison partnership launched, I was reviewing expansion proposals in my corner office when Derek called with an unusual request. "Emma, I need your advice about a situation that's complicated. Can we meet for coffee this afternoon?" Derek's tone carried the kind of careful control that suggested he was dealing with something that challenged his professional composure. We'd developed enough trust over the years that complicated usually meant genuinely difficult rather than merely inconvenient. I found him at our usual coffee shop, staring into a cup that had clearly gone cold while he wrestled with whatever was troubling him. When he looked up, I saw echoes of the uncertainty he'd carried during his early transformation years. "Emma, I received a call yesterday from Margaret Hartwell, my old boss at Patterson Investment Group." Patterson was the prestigious firm where Derek had worked before his career began its downward spiral. Margaret Hartwell was a managing director with the kind of industry influence that could resurrect or permanently bury a financial professional's reputation. What did she want? "She's offering me a position as Senior Vice President for Family Wealth Management. The salary would be 4 times what I'm making now, plus equity participation and access to clients whose net worth starts at $50 million. I studied Derek's expression, noting the conflict between excitement and apprehension. "That sounds like an extraordinary opportunity. What's the complication?" Derek was quiet for several minutes, organizing his thoughts with the care he'd learned to apply to complex financial decisions. "The complication is why they want me. Patterson has been hemorrhaging clients in the family wealth sector because their advisors don't understand how to work with people who earned their money rather than inherited it. Tech entrepreneurs, small business owners who sold companies, professional athletes, people who have wealth but not generational sophistication about managing it. And they think you understand that demographic? They think I understand what it feels like to struggle, to fail, to rebuild from nothing." Margaret said my, quote, "unconventional background would help me connect with clients who feel out of place in traditional wealth management environments." I began to understand Derek's discomfort. "They want to hire you because of your failures, not despite them." Exactly. And Emma, the way Margaret described it, it reminded me of how I used to talk about you. Like my struggles were a useful qualification for serving people who weren't sophisticated enough for their regular advisors. Derek pulled out his phone and showed me the job description Patterson had sent. The language was careful but clear. They wanted someone who could relate to newly wealthy individuals from diverse backgrounds who needed quote 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 what quote 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 wealth management strategies. "Derek, what's your instinct about this offer?" "My instinct is that it's everything I thought I wanted 15 years ago, offered for reasons that make me uncomfortable now." Because they're not hiring me to serve these clients. They're hiring me to manage them, to convince them to adopt investment strategies that benefit Patterson more than the clients themselves. Derek explained what he'd learned through discreet inquiries with former colleagues. Patterson's family wealth division had been losing clients because their traditional approach to wealth management assumed multi-generational sophistication about investments, tax strategies, and estate planning. Their new client demographic doesn't have that background, so they need someone who can translate Patterson's services into language that feels accessible rather than condescending. That sounds like valuable work. It would be if they actually wanted to serve these clients. But Emma, I've seen Patterson's fee structures and investment recommendations. They're designed to extract maximum revenue from people who don't know enough to question the advice they're receiving. The moral dimension of Derek's choice was becoming clear. Patterson was offering him financial success in exchange for using his transformation story to exploit people who reminded him of his younger self. "Derek, what would you do if you took the position?" "I'd help wealthy people avoid the mistakes I made when I was young and entitled. But I'd also be encouraging them to trust an institution that views them as profitable targets, rather than valued clients." Derek showed me client profiles Patterson had shared as examples of their target demographic. Technology entrepreneurs who'd sold companies for hundreds of millions, but had no experience managing that kind of wealth. Professional athletes earning enormous salaries but vulnerable to advisors who didn't understand their unique financial situations. These are people who've achieved incredible success, but don't have generational knowledge about protecting and growing wealth. They need advocates, not predators. And you think Patterson falls into the predator category? I think Patterson sees them as sophisticated enough to generate large fees but naive enough not to question investment strategies that primarily benefit the firm. Derek was facing exactly the kind of moral choice that defined character: personal advancement versus principled service. The old Derek would have taken the position without hesitation, viewing client welfare as secondary to career advancement. Emma, I keep thinking about something you said during my transformation period about the difference between serving people and serving yourself through people. What conclusion are you reaching? That Patterson wants to hire me to serve myself through people who deserve better representation. Derek's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it and smiled grimly. Margaret Hartwell. She wants an answer by Friday and suggests that I shouldn't overthink an opportunity that might not come again. Pressure tactics. Classic pressure tactics. Which tells me everything I need to know about how they plan to treat the clients I'd be serving. We sat in comfortable silence while Derek processed his decision. I could see him weighing financial security against professional integrity, immediate advancement against long-term satisfaction. Emma, can I ask you something about your own moral choices? Of course. When you had the opportunity for revenge against me, what made you choose transformation instead? The question caught me off guard. Derek, I did choose revenge initially. I hired you specifically to fire you. But you didn't stop there. You could have left me humiliated and moved on with your life. Instead, you invested years in helping me become someone better. Why? I thought about the question while watching Derek struggle with his own crossroads. Because revenge that destroys someone doesn't actually solve anything. It just creates more destruction. But revenge that transforms someone creates value that didn't exist before. And if I take the Patterson position? Then you're choosing personal advancement over the opportunity to transform an industry that needs advocates for exactly the kind of clients they want you to exploit. Derek nodded slowly. Emma, I think I know what I need to do, but I'm terrified of making the wrong choice. What choice are you considering? Declining Patterson's offer and proposing something different. A wealth management firm, specifically designed to serve newly wealthy individuals, with transparency, reasonable fees, and actual advocacy, rather than exploitation. The idea was ambitious and risky, but it aligned perfectly with the values Derek had developed through his transformation. Derek, that sounds like exactly the kind of work you've been preparing for without realizing it. But it also means walking away from guaranteed success to attempt something that might fail completely. And how does that feel? Derek laughed, and for the first time since our conversation began, he looked genuinely excited. It feels like the difference between taking a job and building a legacy. 3 weeks later, Derek called Margaret Hartwell to decline Patterson's offer and explain his alternative proposal. He was starting Hartwell Financial, using his family name to honor the relatives who'd supported his transformation, with a focus on serving entrepreneurs, athletes, and other newly wealthy individuals who needed sophisticated financial advice without predatory fee structures. The conversation with Margaret was predictably difficult. Derek, you're making a serious mistake, she told him, according to his later account. Starting a wealth management firm requires capital, credentials, and client relationships that take decades to develop. You're throwing away a guaranteed career for a fantasy. Derek's response surprised even me when he shared it. Margaret, 15 years ago, my cousin told me I'd never succeed at building a business. She was wrong because she underestimated my capacity for growth. I think you're making the same mistake. 6 months after Derek launched Hartwell Financial, his client roster included 12 entrepreneurs, 4 professional athletes, and 6 families who'd inherited wealth but wanted advice that prioritized their interests over their advisors' commissions. Emma, he told me during one of our quarterly dinners, I wanted to thank you for helping me understand the difference between success that serves yourself and success that serves others. How so? If I'd taken the Patterson position, I'd be earning 4 times my current income while helping clients make financial decisions that primarily benefited my employer. Now I'm earning enough to live comfortably while helping clients make decisions that actually serve their long-term interests. And which feels better? The work I'm doing now feels like a natural extension of my transformation, rather than a betrayal of it. Derek's choice to decline Patterson's offer had ripple effects beyond his personal career. 2 other senior advisors had left Patterson to join competing firms that emphasized client advocacy over fee extraction. The family wealth division was struggling to rebuild credibility with the exact demographic they'd hoped Derek would help them exploit. "Margaret called me last week," Derek reported with obvious satisfaction. "Patterson is considering restructuring their fee system and investment recommendations to be more competitive with firms like mine." Industry transformation through market pressure? Industry transformation through moral competition. Clients are learning to demand better representation, and firms that don't adapt are losing business to those that do. Derek had evolved from someone who'd once dismissed others' potential, and to someone whose success was creating opportunities for others to demand better treatment from financial professionals. A year later, I was attending the grand opening of Derek's first satellite office, located in the same building where Patterson Investment Group had once employed him. This symbolism wasn't lost on anyone who knew our family history. Derek's staff included several financial advisors who'd left traditional firms to work for an organization that measured success by client outcomes rather than fee generation. His client testimonials read like transformation stories: entrepreneurs who'd avoided costly investment mistakes, athletes who'd developed sustainable financial plans, families who'd learned to manage inherited wealth responsibly. "Derek," I said during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, "I have to ask, do you miss the prestige and salary you could have had at Patterson?" Derek looked around the office where his team was explaining their fee structure and investment philosophy to potential clients. "Emma, I've learned that prestige without purpose feels hollow, and high salaries don't compensate for compromised integrity. What I have now is something I never had in traditional corporate positions: the certainty that my success aligns with my values. Any regrets about the path that led you here? Only that it took me so long to understand that the most satisfying success comes from serving people who remind you of your younger self, rather than serving people who make you feel important." As the celebration continued around us, I reflected on the unexpected journey Derek and I had taken together. My original plan to hire him just to fire him had been simple revenge, but it had evolved into something more complex and valuable, a partnership that had transformed both of us into people worthy of the success we'd achieved. Derek had been wrong when he told me I'd never succeed, but his error had ultimately led to growth for both of us. I'd learned that the most meaningful victories weren't about proving doubters wrong, but about helping them become the kind of people who would never doubt others' potential in the first place. Standing in Derek's new office, watching him serve exactly the kind of clients Patterson had wanted him to exploit, I understood that the cousin who'd once told me I'd never succeed had become someone who helped others succeed in ways that honored both their ambitions and their values. The revenge had lasted 10 minutes, the transformation had lasted decades, and the legacy we were building together, businesses that served rather than exploited, success that created opportunities for others, wealth that was earned through integrity rather than manipulation, would outlast both of us. Derek had been hired just to be fired, but he'd been fired from who he used to be and hired into who he was always capable of becoming. And that transformation had created something infinitely more valuable than any revenge: proof that even the most dismissive doubter could become someone worth believing in, if they were willing to do the work of earning that trust. The cousin who told me I'd never succeed had become someone who helped others succeed. And together, we'd learned that the most powerful revenge was building something so meaningful that the original insult became irrelevant, not because it had been forgotten, but because it had been transformed into the foundation for something beautiful. 5 years after Derek opened his second office, I was preparing for what had become an annual tradition: hosting the Hartwell family reunion at my estate in the Hamptons. What had once been a gathering where family hierarchies were reinforced had evolved into something more collaborative, with relatives genuinely interested in each other's work rather than just their status. The change hadn't happened overnight. It had taken years of Derek and me demonstrating that success could be built through service rather than dominance, and that transformation was possible at any stage of life. Slowly, other family members had begun questioning their own assumptions about achievement and worth. This year's reunion carried special significance because Derek's 18-year-old daughter, Sarah, was graduating from high school and had been accepted to several prestigious business programs. Unlike Derek's generation, which had viewed education as a pathway to entitlement, Sarah had grown up watching her father learn that credentials meant nothing without character. "Aunt Emma," Sarah said, finding me in the kitchen where I was overseeing the catering for 60 family members, "I wanted to talk to you about something important." Sarah had inherited Derek's intelligence but combined it with a thoughtfulness that suggested she'd absorbed the lessons from his transformation without having to live through the failures first. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about college and career choices, and I wanted to get your perspective on something Dad and I have been discussing." Sarah explained that she'd been offered early admission to Wharton's business program, the same prestigious MBA track that had initially filled Derek with misplaced confidence. But she'd also been considering a different path, a dual degree in social work and nonprofit management, with a focus on financial literacy education for underserved communities. "Dad says I should follow my instincts rather than pursuing prestige for its own sake, but I'm worried about disappointing family expectations." The conversation felt familiar, a young person seeking validation for choosing purpose over status, just as I had decades earlier when Derek dismissed my catering dreams. "Sarah, what draws you to financial literacy education?" "I've been volunteering with Dad's clients, helping their teenagers understand basic financial concepts. Most of these kids are incredibly smart, but they've never been taught how to manage money, invest for the future, or avoid predatory financial products." Sarah pulled out her phone and showed me photos from workshops she'd been conducting. Teenagers learning about compound interest, parents discovering how to establish college savings accounts, families developing budget strategies that accounted for irregular income. "The work feels important, but everyone keeps telling me I'm too smart to waste my potential on social work when I could be earning serious money in finance or consulting." I felt an echo of my younger self, seeking encouragement to pursue meaningful work despite family skepticism about its value or viability. "Sarah, can I share something about the choice between potential and purpose? Please." "When I was your age, I thought potential meant achieving what other people expected of me. It took me years to understand that real potential means becoming who you're uniquely capable of being, regardless of other people's expectations." Sarah nodded, but I could see she was still processing conflicting advice from different family members. "The thing is, Aunt Emma, some relatives think Dad's career path was a step down from where he started. They see his current work as settling for less than he was capable of achieving." "And what does Derek think about that perspective?" "He says those relatives are measuring success by the wrong standards, but I worry that choosing social work over business school means I'm not living up to my academic potential." Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway, having apparently overheard our conversation. "Sarah, can I share something I wish someone had told me when I was 18? Derek joined us at the kitchen island, his expression carrying the kind of paternal wisdom that comes from having learned important lessons the hard way. "The most successful people I know aren't necessarily the ones who maximized their earning potential. They're the ones who found work that utilized their unique combination of skills, interests, and values." "But Dad, what if I choose social work and discover I could have had more impact through traditional business success?" Derek smiled. "Sarah, what if you choose traditional business success and discover you could have had more fulfillment through service-oriented work? Both paths involve risk, but only one aligns with what you're genuinely excited about." I watched the conversation between father and daughter, noting how completely Derek had integrated the lessons from his own transformation. He wasn't pushing Sarah toward any particular choice, but helping her understand the difference between external validation and internal satisfaction. "Sarah," I added, "there's something else to consider. The business world needs people who understand both financial strategy and social impact. Your dual degree could prepare you to build enterprises that serve communities while remaining financially sustainable." "Like what?" "Like a consulting firm that helps nonprofits develop sustainable funding models. Like a financial services company that specializes in serving low-income communities without exploiting them. Like educational programs that teach financial literacy through community organizations." Derek nodded enthusiastically. "Emma's right. You wouldn't be choosing between business success and social impact. You'd be preparing to create business models that achieve both simultaneously." Sarah's expression shifted as she considered possibilities that hadn't occurred to her. So I could use business training to make social work more effective, and social work training to make business more ethical? Exactly. And Sarah, that combination of skills is exactly what the world needs right now. Organizations that can be both profitable and principled, successful and socially responsible. The conversation continued as other family members filtered into the kitchen, drawn by the informal mentoring session taking place around the island. I noticed that several relatives who'd once dismissed Derek's career transformation were now listening carefully to his advice about balancing ambition with integrity. Marcus, Derek's brother-in-law, eventually asked the question I could see others thinking. Derek, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed in traditional finance instead of starting your own firm? Derek considered the question while helping Sarah set up presentation materials for a financial literacy workshop she was planning to demonstrate for the family. Marcus, I know exactly what would have happened. I'd be wealthier, more prestigious, and completely miserable because my success would have been built on serving myself rather than serving others. But don't you miss the financial security that comes with corporate positions? I have financial security now, but it's based on creating value for clients rather than extracting value from them. That feels more sustainable to me, both financially and psychologically. Sarah looked up from her workshop materials. Uncle Marcus, can I ask you something? When you think about your own career, do you measure success by your salary or by the impact you have on other people? Marcus worked as a regional manager for a telecommunications company, a solid middle management position that provided steady income without much personal fulfillment or societal impact. I've never really thought about it that way, Sarah. I guess I measure success by stability and advancement opportunities. But do you feel proud of the work itself, or just proud of the security it provides? The question was innocuous but penetrating, the kind of inquiry that forced honest self-reflection about the difference between career success and life satisfaction. Marcus was quiet for several minutes. Sarah, I have to admit, I've never felt particularly passionate about telecommunications infrastructure. It's work that pays well and supports my family, but it's not work that feels meaningful. Derek joined the conversation carefully. Marcus, there's nothing wrong with prioritizing stability, especially when you have family responsibilities. But there might be ways to find more meaning within your current career, or to develop meaningful work alongside it. Like what? Sarah, energized by the conversation, pulled out her laptop. Uncle Marcus, what if we collaborated on a project? Your company provides internet services to underserved communities, right? What if we developed financial literacy programs that could be delivered through community centers with internet access? The idea was simple but innovative, using telecommunications infrastructure to deliver educational content that helped low-income families develop better financial management skills. Sarah, that's brilliant, I said, immediately seeing the potential. Marcus's industry knowledge combined with your educational expertise could create programming that serves communities while demonstrating the social value of telecommunications infrastructure. Marcus looked intrigued despite himself. Sarah, are you suggesting that I could find meaningful work within my current position by developing community education partnerships? I'm suggesting that almost any industry can become more meaningful if you find ways to use your expertise in service of something larger than profit margins. Derek beamed with obvious pride in his daughter's ability to see connections between different types of work and different ways of measuring success. Sarah, you've just demonstrated exactly why your dual-degree program makes sense. You're thinking like a social worker who understands business strategy and a businesswoman who prioritizes social impact. The impromptu career counseling session continued throughout the afternoon, with Sarah facilitating conversations about purpose-driven work that engaged relatives who'd never considered the connection between personal fulfillment and professional choices. By evening, Sarah had convinced 3 family members to collaborate on community education initiatives that would utilize their existing professional skills in service of financial literacy, digital access, and small business development. Aunt Emma, Sarah said as we cleaned up after dinner, I think I understand something now about the choice between potential and purpose. What's that? They're not actually different things. Real potential means discovering what you're uniquely capable of contributing, and purpose means finding ways to make that contribution meaningful. Derek overheard our conversation and smiled. Sarah, you've just articulated something that took me 20 years to understand. What's that, Dad? That success isn't about maximizing your advantages over other people. It's about maximizing your service to other people. 6 months later, I attended Sarah's graduation ceremony, where she was recognized not only for academic achievement, but for establishing a financial literacy program that had served over 300 families in underserved communities. She'd chosen to attend a state university with a strong social work program rather than pursuing the Wharton MBA, but her decision felt like expansion rather than limitation. "Aunt Emma," she said after the ceremony, "I wanted to thank you for helping me understand that choosing meaningful work isn't settling for less. It's preparing for more." More what? More impact, more satisfaction, more alignment between who I am and what I do with my life. Derek joined us, carrying flowers and wearing the expression of a parent whose child had exceeded his highest hopes. "Sarah, I'm proud of you for choosing a path that aligns with your values rather than other people's expectations. Dad, I learned that from watching your transformation. You showed me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be, and never too early to start being that person." Standing there, watching Derek celebrate his daughter's choice to pursue purpose-driven work from the beginning of her career, rather than learning its value through failure and transformation, I understood that our story had come full circle in the most meaningful way possible. The cousin who'd once told me I'd never succeed had raised a daughter who understood from the beginning that success meant serving others rather than surpassing them. Sarah represented the next generation of our family's evolution, young people who'd grown up watching adults choose integrity over advancement, service over status, transformation over stagnation. "Derek," I said as we watched Sarah accept congratulations from professors and community leaders whose lives had been touched by her work, "I think this is what your transformation was really about." "What do you mean?" "Teaching the next generation that they don't have to choose between success and service, that they can build careers that honor both their abilities and their values from the very beginning." Derek nodded, understanding that Sarah's graduation represented not just her achievement, but the culmination of years of modeling different approaches to work and success. "Emma, when you hired me just to fire me 15 years ago, did you ever imagine it would lead to this?" I looked around at Sarah's celebration, where family members were discussing collaborative projects, meaningful work, and ways to use their professional skills in service of community development. "Derek, when I fired you, I was focused on revenge. I never imagined that helping you transform would transform our entire family's understanding of what success could look like. And now? Now I think the most satisfying revenge is helping someone become the kind of person who would never dismiss another person's potential in the first place." Derek smiled. "Sarah will never tell someone they'll never succeed, because she's learned from the beginning that everyone succeeds differently, and that the most meaningful success comes from helping others discover their own capabilities." As Sarah's graduation celebration continued around us, I reflected on the unexpected legacy of that moment 15 years earlier, when Derek had dismissed my catering dreams. His cruelty had sparked transformation that had rippled through our entire family, creating a new generation that understood success as service, rather than dominance. The cousin who'd told me I'd never succeed had become someone who helped others succeed. His daughter had become someone who would spend her career ensuring that other young people never had to choose between their dreams and their dignity. I'd hired Derek just to fire him, but the real victory was that we'd both been fired from who we used to be and hired into who we were always capable of becoming. And that transformation had created something infinitely more valuable than any revenge. A legacy of service that would outlast both of us, carried forward by young people who understood from the beginning that the greatest success came from lifting others up rather than holding them down. The cousin who'd told me I'd never succeed had been wrong about my potential, but right about one thing. Some people are meant to serve others. He'd just misunderstood what service meant, and it had taken both of us years to learn that serving others was the highest form of success, not the consolation prize for those who couldn't achieve anything better. In the end, we'd both learned to succeed by helping others succeed, and that was a victory worth every moment of the journey it had taken to achieve it. 10 years after Sarah's graduation, I was reviewing the quarterly reports for what had become the Emerald Hartwell Group, a consortium of businesses that had grown organically from Derek's and my individual success stories. What had started as informal collaboration between a catering company and a financial advisory firm had evolved into an integrated platform serving entrepreneurs, small businesses, and community organizations across the Northeast. The growth had been unexpected but logical. Derek's clients often needed event planning services for product launches and corporate celebrations. My catering clients frequently required financial advice for business expansion and personal wealth management. Sarah, now 28 and holding a master's degree in social entrepreneurship, had developed programs that helped our combined client base integrate business success with community impact. I was deep in revenue projections when my assistant announced that we had visitors from the White House Office of Social Innovation and Civic Participation. "The White House?" I asked, certain I'd misheard. "Yes, ma'am. They're here to discuss something called the National Service Enterprise Initiative." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in our main conference room with Derek and Sarah, facing two federal officials who looked like they'd stepped out of a political thriller. Dr. Patricia Williams, the Director of Social Innovation, and her deputy, Michael Chen, had the kind of serious demeanor that suggested this wasn't a routine visit. "Ms. Morrison, Mr. Hartwell," Dr. Williams began, "we're here because your collaborative model has caught the attention of several federal agencies interested in scalable approaches to community development." Derek leaned forward, his financial advisor instincts immediately alert to opportunity and risk. "What kind of attention?" Michael Chen opened a tablet and showed us charts that mapped our business activities against community impact metrics. Over the past decade, communities where your businesses operate have shown measurably higher rates of small business formation, financial literacy, and economic stability. "You've been tracking our impact?" Sarah asked, her social work training making her both pleased and slightly concerned about federal monitoring. "We've been tracking communities that have experienced sustainable economic development without significant government intervention," Dr. Williams explained. "Your model, combining business services with financial education and community engagement, appears to create ripple effects that extend far beyond your direct client base." The officials spent the next hour explaining the National Service Enterprise Initiative, a pilot program designed to identify and scale business models that achieved both profitability and measurable social impact. The initiative would provide federal contracts worth approximately $50 million over 5 years, Dr. Williams continued, to expand your model into underserved communities in 10 states. The number was staggering, representing more growth in 5 years than we'd achieved in the previous 15. But I found myself thinking about the lessons Derek and I had learned about the difference between growth for its own sake and growth in service of a mission. "Dr. Williams," I said, "can you explain what specific outcomes the federal government would expect from this investment?" "Measurable increases in small business formation, financial literacy rates, and economic mobility in target communities. You'd be required to document and report on specific metrics quarterly." Derek was studying the contract specifications, with the careful attention he brought to complex financial arrangements. "Dr. Williams, this level of federal involvement would fundamentally change how we operate. We'd become government contractors rather than independent businesses." "That's correct. But you'd also have resources to achieve impact at a scale that's impossible through private enterprise alone." Sarah had been unusually quiet during the presentation, taking notes and asking occasional clarifying questions. Finally, she looked up with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd identified something important. "Dr. Williams, Mr. Chen, can I ask about the communities you're targeting for this initiative?" "Certainly. Rural areas with limited access to financial services, urban neighborhoods with high poverty rates, regions that have been economically disrupted by industrial changes. And what happens to our current client base while we're focused on federal contract requirements?" The question was perceptive and troubling. Sarah had identified the core tension in the federal offer. We could serve either our existing clients or new federal contract requirements, but probably not both with equal effectiveness. Dr. Williams acknowledged the concern. "You would need to prioritize federal contract deliverables, though you could maintain existing client relationships as resources allowed." Derek and I exchanged glances, recognizing a familiar pattern. The federal government was offering us resources to scale our impact, but with requirements that would fundamentally change the nature of our work. "Dr. Williams," Derek said, "could we have some time to discuss this internally before responding?" "Of course, but I should mention that this opportunity won't remain open indefinitely. The administration is committed to announcing pilot partners within 60 days. After the federal officials left, the three of us sat in the conference room processing what we'd just heard. $50 million in federal contracts, national recognition for our work, the opportunity to serve thousands of families instead of hundreds. It's everything we said we wanted, Sarah observed. Resources to help underserved communities develop economic stability through integrated business services and financial education. But it's also everything we've learned to be cautious about, Derek added. External control, changing our mission to serve bureaucratic requirements rather than client needs, growth that might undermine the personal relationships that make our work effective. I was thinking about something more fundamental. Whether accepting federal funding would change us back into the kind of people we'd worked so hard to transform away from. Derek, Sarah, I have a question that might help us think through this decision. What's that? If we accept this federal contract, will we be serving our mission through government resources, or serving government requirements through our mission? Derek understood immediately. You're asking whether we'd be using federal money to achieve our goals or adapting our goals to qualify for federal money. Exactly. And based on the contract specifications, it seems like the latter. Sarah was reviewing the federal requirements on her laptop. The deliverables are all quantitative. Number of businesses started, percentage increases in financial literacy scores, statistical measures of economic mobility. None of them measure the quality of relationships we build with clients or the sustainability of the changes we help them make, which suggests that the federal government values our methods but doesn't understand our principles, Derek concluded. We spent the next week consulting with current clients, staff members, and community partners about the federal opportunity. Their responses were consistently thoughtful and surprisingly unanimous. Emma, said Maria Santos, one of Derek's longest-standing clients who'd grown her restaurant from a food truck into a small chain. I'm grateful for everything you and Derek have done to help my business succeed. But the reason your help was so effective is that you knew me personally, understood my specific challenges, and adapted your advice to my situation. And you think federal contracting would change that approach? I think federal contracting would require you to treat me like a data point instead of a person. You'd still be helping people, but you wouldn't be helping them in the same way. The feedback from our staff was equally clear. They'd joined our companies because they wanted to do work that felt personal and meaningful, not because they wanted to manage federal compliance requirements and report statistical outcomes to bureaucrats. Ms. Morrison, said Jennifer Walsh, our Director of Community Programs, I left my job at a large nonprofit because I was tired of spending more time on grant reporting than on actual program delivery. This federal contract sounds like it would recreate exactly the problems I was trying to escape. Sarah synthesized the feedback during our final decision meeting. Everyone we've consulted supports our mission and wants us to serve more people. But they're concerned that federal contracting would change how we serve people in ways that might undermine why our approach works. Derek nodded. And there's something else to consider. If we take federal money to expand our model, we're implicitly endorsing the idea that meaningful work requires government support. That contradicts everything we've learned about building sustainable enterprises through private initiative and community relationships. I felt the weight of a decision that would define not just our businesses, but our understanding of how social change actually happened. Derek, Sarah, I think we need to decline the federal contract. Are you sure? Sarah asked. $50 million could help a lot of families. $50 million administered through federal bureaucracy might help some families, but it would definitely change us into people who prioritize compliance over relationships, and people who serve bureaucratic requirements instead of client needs. Derek smiled. Emma, you're choosing transformation over growth again. I'm choosing sustainable impact over impressive statistics. The call to Dr. Williams was brief and professional. We thanked the administration for considering our work worthy of national attention, but explained that federal contracting requirements weren't compatible with the relationship-based approach that made our model effective. Ms. Morrison, Dr. Williams said, I have to ask, are you certain about this decision? This level of federal support won't be offered again. Dr. Williams, we're certain. But we'd be happy to consult with the administration about ways to support community-based enterprise development that don't require converting independent businesses into government contractors. 3 months later, Derek, Sarah, and I were featured on the cover of Harvard Business Review in an article titled, The Service Enterprise Model, When Saying No to Growth Serves Growth Better. The article examined our decision to decline federal funding in favor of continued independent operation, analyzing the business philosophy that prioritized relationship depth over scale, sustainable practices over rapid expansion, and mission integrity over external validation. The Emerald Hartwell Group represents a counterintuitive approach to social enterprise, the article concluded. By refusing to compromise their core methodology for the sake of growth opportunities, they've created a replicable model that other entrepreneurs can adapt to their own communities without requiring federal oversight or bureaucratic infrastructure. The Harvard Business Review feature led to speaking invitations, consulting opportunities, and requests from business schools to develop case studies about our approach. But the most meaningful response came from entrepreneurs around the country who'd read the article and wanted to develop similar enterprises in their own communities. Emma, Derek said, reviewing inquiries from potential collaborators, I think we accidentally discovered something about scalability that the federal officials missed, which is that the most effective way to scale a relationship-based model isn't to grow larger, but to inspire others to grow similarly. Sarah agreed enthusiastically. Instead of expanding our own operations to serve more communities, we could help other people create their own operations that serve their communities using similar principles. The insight led to what we called the Service Enterprise Network, a collaborative platform where independent businesses shared resources, methodologies, and best practices for combining profitability with community impact. Instead of franchising our specific model, we were open sourcing our principles and helping others develop their own applications. It's like the difference between building a chain restaurant and teaching people to cook, Sarah explained to a group of social entrepreneurs who'd come to learn about our approach. Chain restaurants serve more people, but teaching people to cook serves more people better. 5 years after declining the federal contract, the Service Enterprise Network included over 200 independent businesses across 37 states. Each business was locally owned and operated, but all shared common commitments to financial transparency, community engagement, and the integration of business success with social impact. The cumulative impact was extraordinary. Thousands of small businesses started with ethical financial guidance, tens of thousands of families served by enterprises that prioritized their needs over profit margins, entire communities experiencing economic development that strengthened rather than displaced existing social networks. Emma, Derek said during our annual network conference, I keep thinking about that moment 15 years ago when you fired me from a job I thought I desperately needed. What about it? I think that moment taught us both that the most important growth happens when you're willing to sacrifice immediate opportunities for long-term integrity. Sarah, now 33 and recognized as a leading expert on social entrepreneurship, had taken over day-to-day leadership of the network, while Derek and I focused on strategic development and mentorship. Dad, Aunt Emma, I wanted to share something I've been thinking about regarding your original relationship. What's that? I think your story illustrates something important about the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge would have been hurting Dad for dismissing Aunt Emma's potential. Justice was helping him become someone who would never dismiss anyone's potential. Derek nodded thoughtfully. Sarah, your generation understands something that took us decades to learn. That the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't proving doubters wrong, but proving doubters unnecessary. What do you mean? I mean building a world where everyone's potential is recognized from the beginning, so no one has to fight for the right to be taken seriously. Standing in the conference center where 200 social entrepreneurs were sharing strategies for community-based business development, I reflected on the journey from that moment 15 years earlier, when Derek had dismissed my catering dreams, to this moment when we were helping others build enterprises that honored both their business acumen and their social values. The cousin who'd told me I'd never succeed had become someone who helped others succeed in ways that served their communities. His daughter had become someone who would spend her career ensuring that other young people never had to choose between their dreams and their values. I'd hired Derek just to fire him, but the real victory was that we'd both been fired from who we used to be and hired into who we were always capable of becoming. And that transformation had created something infinitely more valuable than any revenge. A network of enterprises that proved success through service wasn't just possible, but replicable, scalable, and sustainable. The cousin who'd told me I'd never succeed had been wrong about my potential, but his dismissal had sparked a journey that ultimately validated both our potentials in ways neither of us could have imagined. Derek had learned that credentials without character were worthless, and that the most satisfying success came from helping others achieve their own versions of success. I'd learned that revenge without transformation was hollow, and that the most powerful victories were the ones that created opportunities for others to win as well. Together, we'd built something that honored both our individual transformations and our shared commitment to ensuring that no one else would have to choose between their ambitions and their integrity. The network would outlast both of us, carried forward by entrepreneurs who understood from the beginning that the greatest success came from serving others rather than surpassing them. And that was a legacy worth every moment of the journey it had taken to create it. 25 years after Derek told me I'd never succeed, I stood in the renovated warehouse that housed the Service Enterprise Network's headquarters, preparing for what would be my final speech as the organization's founding director. At 58, I was ready to step back from daily leadership while remaining involved as an emeritus advisor. The celebration was modest by design, just the network's core team, a few dozen entrepreneurs from member businesses, and family members who'd witnessed the entire journey from bitter family rivalry to collaborative enterprise. Derek, now 63 and officially retired from active financial advising, sat in the front row beside Sarah, who would be taking over as the network's executive director. Behind them were faces that represented the human impact of our work. Maria Santos, whose restaurant chain now employed 47 people. Jennifer Walsh, who'd left our organization to start her own community development consultancy. Dozens of others whose lives had been changed by the principle that business success and social service weren't competing priorities. 25 years ago, I began, looking directly at Derek, my cousin told me I'd never succeed. He was wrong about my potential, but he was right about something else. Success isn't about individual achievement. It's about creating value for others. Derek smiled, understanding that this wasn't a moment of recrimination but of gratitude for a journey neither of us could have completed alone. Derek's dismissal of my dreams was painful, but it sparked a transformation that changed both of us. I learned that the most satisfying revenge isn't proving doubters wrong. It's helping them become the kind of people who would never doubt others' potential in the first place. I gestured toward the service enterprise map that covered one wall of the conference room, showing 347 independent businesses across 42 states, all committed to combining profitability with community impact. This network exists because we learned that sustainable success comes from serving others rather than surpassing them. Every business represented on this map was started by someone who chose purpose over prestige, service over status, community impact over individual advancement. Sarah stood to address the group, her presence representing the generational transition that would carry our work forward. Aunt Emma, Dad, thank you for teaching us that transformation is always possible, that revenge can become service, and that the most meaningful success is the kind that creates opportunities for others to succeed as well. She paused, looking around the room at entrepreneurs who'd built enterprises serving rural communities, urban neighborhoods, immigrant families, veterans, and dozens of other populations that traditional businesses often overlooked. The Service Enterprise Network will continue growing, but not by expanding our own operations. We'll grow by helping others discover that business success and social impact aren't just compatible, they're mutually reinforcing when approached with integrity and commitment to community welfare. After the formal program ended, Derek and I found ourselves alone in the conference room, looking at the map that represented 25 years of collaborative work. Emma, he said quietly, I need to thank you for something I've never properly acknowledged. What's that? You could have destroyed me when you fired me that day. You had every right to humiliate someone who dismissed your dreams so cruelly. Instead, you chose to transform both of us into people worthy of the success we eventually achieved. I thought about the young woman who'd been so hurt by his dismissal that she'd planned elaborate revenge, and the middle-aged man who'd been so desperate for employment that he'd accepted a job offer from someone he'd once considered beneath his notice. Derek, we transformed each other. I couldn't have built the Service Enterprise Network without your financial expertise and your understanding of what it means to fail and rebuild. You couldn't have developed your community-focused practice without learning from someone who'd always understood that business success meant serving others. Derek nodded. Emma, can I ask you something I've wondered about for years? Of course. Do you ever regret the path we took? The federal contract we declined? the growth opportunities we passed up, the conventional success we chose to transform rather than pursue. I looked around the conference room where hundreds of entrepreneurs had learned to build businesses that honored both their ambitions and their values. Where Derek had evolved from someone who dismissed others' potential into someone who helped them realize it. Where I'd learned that the most satisfying revenge was creating something so meaningful that the original insult became irrelevant. Derek, I regret nothing. We built something that will outlast both of us, that's already inspired others to create their own versions of enterprises that serve their communities. We proved that success through service isn't just a nice idea, it's a sustainable business model. And if you could go back and change that moment when I dismissed your catering dreams, I wouldn't change it. That moment of cruelty became the foundation for decades of kindness. Your dismissal sparked a journey that ultimately validated both our potentials in ways neither of us could have imagined. Derek was quiet for several minutes, processing 25 years of transformation that had begun with his arrogant certainty about my limitations. Emma, I think the most remarkable thing about our story is that it proves people can change fundamentally, not just superficially. I'm not the same person who told you you'd never succeed. You're not the same person who planned revenge against a dismissive cousin. No, we're not. We're better versions of ourselves, shaped by years of choosing service over selfishness, transformation over stagnation, collaboration over competition. As we prepared to leave the headquarters for the final time as active leaders, Derek stopped at the wall where we'd hung photographs documenting the network's growth over 2 decades. Emma, look at this. He pointed to a photo from our first annual conference, showing 12 entrepreneurs gathered around a conference table. Do you remember what we talked about that day? We talked about whether it was possible to build businesses that were both profitable and principled. Whether serving others could actually serve our own interests better than serving only ourselves. And what conclusion did we reach? That it wasn't just possible. It was inevitable if you were willing to do the work of earning trust and creating value for others. Derek pointed to the most recent photo, showing 347 entrepreneurs from the current network. And now we know we were right. Driving home through the city where I'd started my catering business in a tiny apartment kitchen, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had transformed personal revenge into collaborative service, individual success into community development, family conflict into lasting partnership. The cousin who'd told me I'd never succeed had become someone who helped others succeed in ways that honored both their capabilities and their values. Together, we'd built a legacy that proved the most powerful revenge was creating something so meaningful that the original injury became a footnote in a much larger story about transformation and service. Derek had been wrong when he told me I'd never succeed, but his error had ultimately led to success beyond anything either of us could have achieved independently. I'd hired him just to fire him, but the real victory was that we'd both been fired from who we used to be, and hired into who we were always capable of becoming. The Service Enterprise Network would continue without us, carried forward by entrepreneurs who understood from the beginning that the greatest success came from lifting others up rather than holding them down. And that transformation, from cruelty to kindness, from dismissal to encouragement, from individual achievement to collective service, was the most successful business venture either of us had ever undertaken. The cousin who'd told me I'd never succeed had been wrong about my potential, but right about one thing: some people are meant to serve others. He just misunderstood what service meant, and it had taken both of us decades to learn that serving others was the highest form of success, not the consolation prize for those who couldn't achieve anything better. In the end, we'd both succeeded by helping others succeed. And that was a victory worth every moment of the journey it had taken to achieve it. The end.